really when you want to start looking at the Asterisk real-time architecture, those sorts of things. But for now, let's just start out with the basics. We're going to start off with the plain text config files and start looking at those and how they work. Now, anybody here know how to edit a plain text file? Good. It's pretty easy, right? No special tools. We're not going to sell you, a $300 application to be able to edit the configuration files. It's just a plain text file. Okay? So let's look at what they look like. Now, first of all these configuration files typically live in the /etc/asterisk directory. Now, if you're familiar with Unix and Linux, the /etc directory is usually where your configuration files go. We've got a subdirectory in there for asterisk. And all of these configuration files are going to have a .conf, a .conf extension to tell you it's a configuration file. Okay? And they are just plain ASCII text files. Use your favorite text editor to edit them. So for the Linux people in the room, how many people here use Emacs? Boo. How many people here use VI? Yay. You always have to have that debate, right? Anytime you get Linux. How many people in here don't know what either VI or Emacs are and don't care? There's probably a few of those too. So use whatever editor you're comfortable with. Now, when we teach this module in the Asterisk classes, we actually simplify some of the Asterisk configuration files to help people get started. And I think that's one of the problems that Asterisk suffers from right now is that the configuration files, kind of the sample configuration files that come with Asterisk, they're great. They've got a lot of detail in there, but they're really overwhelming when you first start looking at them. So I want to kind of take a step back and look at a very, very simple version of each of those configuration files and get you the basics, and then you can go look at the sample configuration file that comes with Asterisk and say, aha, now I understand what that's doing. Okay? Before we dive into the individual configuration files, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the structure of the configuration files themselves. Anybody here use Windows about 10 years ago? I admit I used Windows about 10 years ago. Anybody familiar with like .ini files under Windows? Oh, the pain, I know. So we use that same sort of structure when we build configuration files in Asterisk. Anything that's a section of a configuration file is going to have a section heading, and that's in square brackets. So you see my section heading there. Okay? Underneath the section heading, you're going to have settings, and it's going to be the name of the setting equals and a value. So you can say setting equals true, another setting equals false, password equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the settings happen to be. If you want to put a comment in there, you put a semicolon, and then from the semicolon to the end of the line, that's a comment. Okay? What if you want to have a comment that spans multiple lines? Well, if you put a semicolon, hyphen, hyphen, that starts a block comment, and that block comment is going to continue on all the way down till we get the hyphen, hyphen, semicolon there at the bottom. So if you want a multi-line comment, that's how you would do that. Okay? Not the most advanced configuration file format in the world, but it's very easy and it works. Okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is what configuration files do we need to edit to get an Asterisk system up and running. If you were to install Asterisk on a box, and we've got a box here that we'll play around with here today, you'd find that there are probably 25 or 30 different configuration files because each of these modules often have their own configuration file, and there's lots of different modules. So really there's 5 files that I find that are the most important ones that you want to start worrying about, especially as you're just learning Asterisk. So we're going to talk about asterisk.conf, which is kind of the master configuration file. We're going to look at 3 of the configuration files for the different channel drivers. We're going to talk about sip.conf. We're going to configure some phones to use the SIP protocol. We're going to talk about eeks.conf. Eeks is the inter-asterisk exchange protocol. It's a voice over IP protocol for Asterisk boxes to talk to other Asterisk boxes. So we'll talk about its configuration a little bit and its channel driver. The third channel driver we want to look at is the DOTI channel driver. So chan.doti.conf is the configuration file for analog phones, analog phone lines, T1s, E1s, those sorts of things. And then last but not least, we want to look at extensions.conf. Extensions.conf is our dial plan. This is where we add the logic to the system. This is where we have the most fun in Asterisk. Okay? So let's start off looking at just kind of the basics of these files. And then we'll come back and get into some more real-world examples. So like I said, asterisk.conf is kind of the master configuration file. It tells Asterisk where to find its other modules, where to find its configuration files, how to start up. And the default settings that come in Asterisk.conf for 99% of the time are satisfactory. You don't need to go messing with Asterisk.conf very often. The stock settings really do work in most circumstances. Now, if you want to put your files in different directories and change your file system layout, this is where you want to go tell it, hey, I want my voicemail stored in this directory, and this is where the module files are, and this is where the configuration files are. That's where it finds all that type of information. Okay. One thing that I do like to point out to people, anybody who's used Asterisk here, you notice that on the Linux terminal it often goes to a black background with white text, and then you'll see like purple and blue text scattered in there. If you don't like that, there is an option that you can go into Asterisk.conf in the optional section there in Asterisk.conf that says no color equals yes. Uncomment that setting, restart Asterisk, and then you'll just get your normal black text on a white background in your Linux terminal. Some people find that a little more easier, a little easier to read. The next configuration file we want to talk about is the channel driver for the SIP protocol. So the SIP protocol driver here has a general section at the top of the file, and that's going to just set your kind of basic settings for the SIP protocol within Asterisk. What network port does Asterisk listen on for SIP messages? What does it identify itself as in SIP messages? Those sorts of things. Further down in the configuration file, we're going to list out any SIP devices that we're going to have connected. Say we have a SIP phone here, we want to connect it to Asterisk. Or if we want to have let's say we have a SIP trunk or a SIP service provider that we want to connect to, we would list that in SIP.conf as well. And we'll get into the, like I said, we'll get into the details of those configuration files. But I want you to have an idea of what SIP.conf is, first of all. Okay? Just like SIP.conf, we can do the same thing for eeks.conf for the inter-asterisk exchange protocol. Again, the general section is going to be kind of your general settings, network addresses and ports to listen on, those sorts of things. And then we're going to list out eeks devices or eeks service providers that we want to connect to. Okay. The third channel driver I talked about was DOTI. Again, this is for configuring of analog and analog lines, analog devices, and in trunks like T1s and E1s. DOTI is a little more complicated, and there's really two pieces to DOTI. There's a set of kernel drivers, system drivers for the hardware cards, and then there's Asterisk talking to that driver. So it's kind of a two-step process. And so that's why I put at the bottom of the slide here, it works in conjunction with the DOTI kernel drivers. So the DOTI kernel driver has a configuration file, that etc.doti-system.conf, where you configure, I have this card in my machine, and it's got this many ports, and these are analog ports, those sorts of things. And then the DOTI channel driver uses the etc*chan_doti.conf file to talk to that driver. Sure.
If you're using just soft phones like PC to PC,
you wouldn't need to worry about DOTI as well. This is, again, only for analog and T1 type connections, your PSTN type connections. If you're doing straight voice over IP with soft phones or IP phones, you don't have to worry about chan.doti.conf as well.
So I'm getting the idea that there's no centralized topology management in Asterisk.
There's not. It's very free form. Any structure that's there is structure that you add on top of it.
Distributed amongst all these different conf files.
Correct. Yep, and it's really up to you as the Asterisk administrator to make sense of it all and make sure that you keep things organized in a way that works for you, because what makes sense for you may not fit somebody else's mantra, especially as flexible as Asterisk is. But yeah, there's no centralized user management or anything like that. It is just the hodgepodge collection of different configuration files, and however you put those together, that works. Okay, question here, and then we'll get back there.
Do we have any copies of these slides anywhere that we can download?
That's a good question. That's what I'm trying to get an answer to this morning.
If you can give us a page to download it from.
Sure. That's what we're trying to figure out. Several years ago, we used to give people, as they walked out the door at the end of the day, a CD with all the slides on there. Then we found people were taking those slides and teaching their own classes based on our material. So one of the things we're doing is trying to get this video. We're doing recording of the video, and we're going to try to make that publicly available. I'm hoping we can get everything lined up in a row to be able to do that. If not, you can always come to one of Digium's training classes and get the material that way. Shameless plug. You guys can pay me later. Okay, we're good. All right. Question back here in the back.
With
Mm-hmm.
Can we do the same type of thing with the key one cards with a crossover table
Yes,
and have one side simulate the public exchange?
you can.
Exchange?
Right. So on a T1 connection or an E1 connection, there's two sides of the connection. One side is called the network, when that's the telco side, and the other end is called the CPE, or customer premise equipment side. That's the PBX side. Yes, Asterisk will emulate either side, and you can do a crossover, a T1 crossover between two ports or two boxes to emulate a telco. Absolutely. That's what we do in our training classes.
I actually need to do that myself.
It comes in very, very handy, especially when you're connecting to other PBXs and doing troubleshooting and those sorts of things. So yes, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about 4 of the configuration files that we want to talk about. The last one we want to talk about is the dial plan. This is a configuration file called extensions.conf. Don't ask me why they didn't call it dialplan.conf. I don't know. It's extensions.conf. Now, the word extension gets overloaded a lot, especially when you're talking about telephone systems and PBXs. So let me take a break from the slides here for just a second to talk about what is an extension. Okay? On a traditional PBX, an extension is what? It's a phone, right? This is extension 123, right? Or it's a set of wires that goes out to a particular phone, right? In the world of Asterisk, an extension, a phone is not an extension. An extension is just a set of actions in the dial plan. Okay? That extension may say, hey, go ring out to that device, or go send the call to voicemail, or put the caller in a call queue. But an extension is not a device. They're treated separately in Asterisk. And so that's one of the major hurdles people run into as they start learning Asterisk is we use little different terms for things. So an extension is just a set of actions in the dial plan that may or may not call out to a device through a channel driver. Okay? So in talking about extensions.conf, this is where we get to script what happens when you dial a particular extension number. You dial extension 123. Does it ring this phone? Can people from the outside call that extension, or is it just something that can be called internally? So this is where you also set security boundaries within your system. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time today teaching you the basics of extensions.conf, because this is where the real power of Asterisk is. It's in being able to script how you want your PBX to be built. Okay. So to cover what we've kind of recap what we've covered here in Module 2, we talked about the architecture of Asterisk. We've talked about how Asterisk modules work, and that you can plug these different modules together. We talked a little bit about the channel drivers, the resources, the applications. You remember that big picture that I showed. There's a command line interface that we have. There's also programmatic interfaces that we have that other programs can use to communicate with Asterisk. And then I've introduced you to the configuration files. All right. Any questions up to this point?
Are you going to talk about real-time requirements for the processing system, the operating system, in terms of transcoding calls, that sort of thing?
It's really, we don't go into it in a lot of detail because everybody's situation is slightly different. But in general, because this is a PBX in software, most everything is done in CPU. All the transcoding, all the protocol conversion, signaling conversion, all that is done in the CPU. So the more CPU power you have available, the more concurrent calls you can handle. Digium sells a number of PCI and PCI Express cards that you can put in the machine to offload that transcoding in certain cases to dedicated silicon, a DSP in a card, to offload that from the CPU. That's available for certain codecs and certain configurations. That isn't available for all codecs yet. So, but those sorts of things can certainly help as far as.
So, but in general, you do not need a real-time version of Linux.
Nope. Just your ordinary version. Go download Fedora, or Red Hat, or CentOS, or Debian, or Ubuntu, or again whichever flavor of Linux or Unix you're most comfortable with, and it'll work just fine.
Does Asterisk provide functionality for handover backups? Like you have multiple systems and one fails, so the others will take over?
Not in and of itself, it doesn't. And things like backups, it's really up to you to do from an operating system level, not within Asterisk. That's one of the things we've always struggled with is